Alright, so this is going to be a video on practice and tilt. Don't mind the background, it's just me playing Anivia. It doesn't really mean anything. I'm bad. But I'm going to talk about practice and tilt. Now, there are questions that are raised about practice and tilt all the time. If you look on a pro stream, you'll find at least one donation a day asking how many games should I play, how many games should I practice, or you'll find questions about how do I avoid tilt, how do I handle tilt. Um, and streamers' answers are often unsatisfactory, right? They may not answer at all. They may just meme you, and a lot of them just say, "Well, it depends." And that last answer is the most true. But obviously, this video is going to help you with this somehow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the tools you need to come up with your own personal solutions to these, because these are personal problems that you have to deal with individually. So I'm hoping that this will. I'll give you a process to look at these two things. And I did not pick these two things and just stick them together into one video for no reason. I'm doing it because they are related, although they initially do not seem to be. There is one assumption we have to go over before we begin, and that's just that I assume you're trying to improve, right? If you're not trying to improve, you don't really have to worry about practicing at all. But maybe the tilting applies to you still. So there's that. So let's get on with it. We'll start with practice. So we need to define what makes practice, because practice is more than just playing games, right? Because if you could just play games and get better, there'd be a lot of people that shouldn't be in bronze, silver, gold, like platinum. Most people should be. There are a lot of people that should be like diamond, masters, and challenger. If just playing games is practice. Um, I played World of Tanks with really high elo players, and one of the people that I talked with a lot, that I played with a lot, had something really interesting to say. Because in World of Tanks, you can play a fuck ton of games. All right, games last like 7 minutes, so there would be people with 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 games, right? And you'd see these people playing like 20,000 games, and you'd wonder how they can still be so bad, right? Because World of Tanks is a really flamey game. And I brought this up one day, and my friend said, he's like, "Well, it's because we've played 10,000 games, and they've played the same game 10,000 times." And that's, this is, in a sense, it's true, right? It insinuates there's a difference between just playing and then playing to improve. And so to analyze that, we can look at League in terms of a relationship, because League is a relationship, like your work is a relationship, like your relationship with your family members, like your relationship with your significant others, because it's about give and take, right? You obviously want to get something from this, a sense of satisfaction, of self-worth, of ego stroking, pleasure from egotistical fellatio. You know, you want to get something out of it, and you have to give something to get something out of it. If you're trying to improve, that is, if you're trying to not even improve, but even just to climb rank, you got to give and you got to get. And that's the essence of a relationship. It doesn't matter if it's with a person or with an entity or something like that. So we're going to look at leagues in terms of a relationship. So what do you have to do in order to improve your relationships? Um, and I'd say that it's mostly just about paying attention to things, right? If you pay attention and listen to your girlfriend when she's ranting about something that you think you just shouldn't care about or whatever, and you listen to her and she's actually talking about a really formative moment in her life that changed her perspective on the world, you'll learn something about her, and you'll gain some insight on her vision of the world, and maybe you'll be able to offer something to her if you actually listen, and that'll improve your relationship. But if you don't listen, she fucking glares at you until you realize that, oh wait, she just said something, and then she's mad, and then she either like dumps you or sighs, and you realize that she's probably going to dump you in 3 months because this was actually something that's really important to her, right? So that's how you improve your relationship with people, and it's the same thing with how you improve your relationship at like work too, right? You have to pay attention. You have to do outside research on the topic that you're working with, and you have to pay attention at work and actually try to accomplish things, and actually consider the problems that you're dealing with to deal with them in a way that's not maybe creative, maybe just correct. It depends on what job you're doing, right? But that helps you build your relationship. It shows that you care. So there's this concept that you have to pay attention. All right, you have to attend to something to get to improve your relationship, right? And this is true with League as well, because you can tell those games when you're improving, right? Like when you're actually looking at your spell cooldowns, when you're looking at your health, when you're looking at your mana pool, when you're putting the summoner timers in chat, when you're always looking at your mini map, when you're warding at the proper time so that you don't get ganked on immobile mid laners, things like that. Like when you're doing that, when you're actively doing that, that's because you're paying attention to the game. And maybe you don't do all those things at the same time, right? But that's because we're trying to improve, right? Like maybe you really spend a game looking at the mini map a lot more than you usually would, and you can tell that it makes a difference. And maybe you win or lose the game. It doesn't really matter, but you paid attention and you made less mistakes than you normally would because you actually paid attention to your mini map, or you saw that you didn't have the mana to go for an all-in or something like that. But then there's the alternative, right? And you think, well, League is like a skill-based game. Skill should build up, right? But it doesn't always. Because not paying attention to the game is basically when you play on autopilot, right? Like, you know how it is when you're just kind of sitting there and you're going through the game and you're like, oh, I should probably be here. Oh, man, I should have punished that person when they were that far up. Or, oh, yeah, I should probably look for a roam right now. And you're doing everything just a little bit little bit slower. Ugh, excuse me, I'm not drunk, I swear. You're doing everything just a little bit slower. You're not paying attention to the things you normally would. You're missing your chances for all-ins. You're missing your chances for roams. And it's always by the slimmest of margins. Things like that. And this is because you're not paying attention to the game, right? Like, you're not giving it as much attention as you should, and you're just kind of cruising through it, And if your game could fucking talk to you after it was done, it would get up and slap you across the face and say, hey, you said you wanted to get better at looking at the minimap, but by God, I think you were looking at your dick more than you were looking at the minimap this game. Holy shit, how many times did you get ganked? Did you even ward? What the fuck were you doing? So if your game would slap you after it's done, that's another good way to tell that that you weren't paying attention. So good practice, is about paying attention. Now we also have to consider that you can't pay attention all the time, right? There's a limited amount of attention that people have because maybe normally you do listen to your girlfriend when you come home after a long day at work. Or when you come home after work. But maybe it was just a really long day or something like that, and you don't necessarily listen to everything she says, right? And that's not necessarily your fault or her fault, and maybe she'll understand, if you don't do that all the time. Maybe you just didn't have the energy that day, and that's fine, right? So, this means that there's some sort of limit to this, though. There's some sort of limit to how much attention you can give the game in a day. So the next obvious step is to find this limit, right? To find the ideal amount of possible games you can pay attention in a day. And so as with everything, we'll look to the pros for an example of this in League of Legends, because the pros are pretty close to the ideal when it comes to a lot of League of Legends. So if we want to look at pros, we should probably look at pros who have the best work ethics. And when you're looking at NA, the name you'll often hear when you're talking about pros with amazing work ethics is Bjergsen. When you look to EU, there's a guy called Forgiven. Now, you probably heard of him if you haven't been living under a rock. But if you haven't, this guy was famous because at one point it was disclosed that he was playing 11 solo queue games a day for practice. For the normal season, mind you. Or for the normal season or playoffs. I forget which one it was. But this was not for Worlds. This was normal season. All right. And that's insane. 11 games a day? That's a lot of fucking League of Legends. That, given challenger queue times and everything like that, that's about 11 hours, right? You're talking 30-minute games with 10 to 20-minute queue times, and holy shit, there goes your day, right? So that's a lot of attention. That's a lot of attention that he spends on League of Legends. Now, was that all of his possible attention? I don't think so. Yeah, that's a lot. It's probably more than any pro tends to dedicate in the vast majority of circumstances, but he probably had to do other things. He probably has to have a social component to his day, and he probably has to have some sort of obligation to his organization, right? Because pros do play League of Legends, but the way they make a living is with their branding. So there's some sort of obligation he has to his organization in order to make money beyond just playing League of Legends. So we'll just say that his socialization and his obligation to the organization, that's a mouthful, takes up about 2 extra games of time. So if Forgiven had the most possible practice time given his circumstances, and if those both take up 1 game, this leaves us mortals, us human beings, with about 13 games of attention that we can spend per day. It may vary, right? This isn't exact science or anything like that, but it's a good number to start with, and it kind of makes sense when you look at it in the scale of time too, because we spend 8 hours a day sleeping. That's a good one, right? I wish, ideally, and then there's about 90 minutes when you wake up where you're kind of groggy and you can't really be asked to do anything too complex, right? Like, God forbid you have to perform a complex task right after you wake up because you might just fucking, if it's important, you're probably going to fuck it up. And then there's about an hour and a half at the end of the day where you're just kind of winding down and, you've done everything today and you're just kind of not quite ready for bed, but definitely not in a super conscious state of mind. So this kind of makes sense, right? Because 16 hours of waking day and then 3 hours of grogginess between your period of sleep. So this kind of makes sense in the scale of a day. So now let's take this into context, right? Because this is the ideal. At most, you could play 13 games a day, right? If you were a human being bred solely with the purpose of playing League of Legends, maybe you'll be able to play 13 games a day, but that's not very likely given that we live in the real world and not Korea or some sort of fucking Huxley's wet dream. Nightmare, if you will. But, so let's look at context, because we have other stuff that we do that needs our attention. In the case of League of Legends players who tend to be males aged 18 to 24, this is college. Maybe a little bit of high school, maybe a little bit of not college, right? After college, actually doing jobs, things like that. So we have generally four big other things that require attention in our life. That's going to be school, homework, which is something much separate and very important. Whether you want it to be or not. Actual work, and then socialization. And these things take about 2 to 5 games of attention per day. Obviously it may be more, it may be less. Schedules vary. You don't do the same thing every day. But it's a good guess. It's a good number. So this means that, assuming you do the bare minimum for these things, right? Let's assume that you just don't do one of those things every day, and you do the bare minimum. This means that about 6 games a day worth of attention just is already gone, right? Between all the other stuff that you have to do, that leaves you with 7 games worth of attention that you can maybe commit to, all right? If you want to give it your all. And it's important to recognize that going beyond this, right? Trying to stretch this and try and do 8, 9, 10, that's not good, because that builds bad habits, right? That's not good practice. So going beyond that isn't really recommended. And now, what I want you to do is build this kind of idea for yourself, right? Like, you have this idea of what your priorities are and what you need to do. And so now you can use this kind of concept and look at your schedule and see how many games a day you have time for, right? And you may find that you don't have time for League of Legends, and that's okay, because you need to do those things, right? Those things need to be dealt with before you can play. You must work before you play, otherwise your brain will rebel against you. It happens, right? So maybe you don't have time for League of Legends. Maybe you'll find you have time for one game, couple games. Maybe you figure out that you actually have a lot of time because you have a bunch of easy classes and you don't need to work right now, or you don't have a job right now, which may be a good thing or a bad thing. But you look at this and you can build your own kind of sense of your schedule. And that's a good way to approach practice, in my opinion. So this way you can develop a practice regimen if you want to take this really seriously, or you can take it not so seriously and realize that you want to devote more time to socialization or school or whatever. Or you may look at this and realize, holy shit, I'm doing like 20 games of stuff that I'm supposed to be attentive to, and I don't like have that much consciousness in me. You may realize that your life is already overcrowded, so that would help you too, right? Because it's important to realize those things. So now let's move on to tilt, right? And we're gonna also define tilt in terms of a relationship. Um, so you know what? There's different types of tilt, right? There's tilt and there's advanced tilt, and you know what I'm talking about. But I'll kind of break it down in case you know. So there's kind of that like single game tilt, right? Where it's just like someone picked Fizz ADC on your team and the fucking enemy mid laner picked Cho'Gath into LeBlanc and you just want to fucking commit suicide because that might be the most miserable fucking thing that you've had to endure, right? It might be one of those deals. Um, and that can happen several times in a row, right? But it's different when it starts happening a lot, right? It's one thing if you miss like a couple cannon minions in one game, but it's another thing completely if it's like happening 10 games in a row or something like that, right? Like there's something else going on. And it's the same thing with relationships again. Um, right? Like you may come home and you'll just see something that sets you off, right? Like your significant other was supposed to take out the trash, or they were supposed to handle this one bill that you couldn't, and they just didn't do it, right? And you're just furious over this, right? You're absolutely fucking mad, and you feel 100% righteous in it, and you get in an argument, and whatever, you may leave, you may stay, but you just get furious. And then when you sit down afterwards and you actually consider what they did, you find that it really wasn't so bad, right? The actual thing that they did was like not deserving of the anger that you had, right? Because you didn't have like it's not the kind of like whatever slightly annoyed anger. It's the kind of anger that the Chicago style anger stab them or not stab them, excuse me, they fall on your knife 13 times, right? And that's a reference. I'm not a serial killer, but what I'm saying is that you'll have this type of anger that is completely like overstated for how little the actual thing they did was. And so this must have some other source because no one gets in a serious argument with their SO about what side the fucking toilet paper was facing unless they're either joking or there's something else going on, right? And usually there is something else going on. And so an example of like single game tilt, this might be something today like you showed up late for work, right? Like you slept through your alarm, you showed up late for work, and it's the first time you've ever done this, but your boss decides to make a fucking example out of you, and he just like reams you about it, and he's like just ridiculously angry for how little this thing was, and maybe he's just doing it to assert his dominance. Maybe he's doing it because he has a bad day, but you don't really care about that because he was just an asshole and he didn't really deserve it. And so this is the example of single game tilt because sometimes shit just rolls downhill, right? Like sometimes things just don't go your way, and that's okay, right? Like sometimes people make mistakes and you can fix it. You just like for League when you have single game tilt, the easiest solution to deal with this is just to take a little break, right? Like sit back and consider what happened and go, you know what? Yeah, that was kind of unlucky. There's no real reason to be angry over this. Sometimes people just don't want to win the game and they decide to lock Syndra top. And you can't really do anything about that, right? All you can do is like try to recognize it earlier and not go as ham. But sometimes when you sit down and consider this, you realize that there's more to it. So, Sometimes it's because you have personal issues, right? Like maybe you have legit fucking anger issues, or maybe the idea of the toilet paper being on the wrong side reminds you of a time that your parents like abused you or something like that. Like I'm not gonna be like a fucking psychologist here, but my point is that sometimes people have personal issues, right? And they need to deal with those, and you realize like, holy shit, I shouldn't be taking this out on this person. Like my anger was way, way, way too much for that specific situation, and it happens a lot because you have this personal issue, right? Or maybe they have personal issues too. That's another thing that you should consider. But it's pretty much the same thing in terms of LOL. But there's another type of chronic tilt beyond just having like personal anger issues or whatever, right? And this is what I call the toxic tilt. The toxic, I compare it to toxic relationships, right? Because there's some sort of fundamental issue at hand that's not necessarily mental, but it's like caused by the relationship itself, by like your combination with this person is just not good for you. And so this can be like abusive relationships or whatever, or you can realize that you're like neglecting them, or they're like neglecting you, like actively. Like you realize that one party has put in a lot more effort than they've gotten out, and it's just like damaging your relationship. And I compare this to LOL because maybe it's better to compare this to Netflix, LOL to Netflix in this situation, because you know when you're sitting there and you have an essay due, and instead of doing your essay, you decide to watch Netflix, and you're sitting there and you're absolutely 100% stressed out because you know that you should be doing this other much more important thing, right? That's the same way with League, right? People use League for its not for its intended purposes, and they'll neglect other things that they have to do. They'll neglect their jobs, they'll neglect their significant others, they'll neglect their school and things like this, and this causes problems because even though like you may be playing League of Legends, your mind is not playing League of Legends. Your mind is sitting there going, "Hey, you're wasting $700 per class fucking around playing League of Legends because you don't want to do your essays? Wow, how aren't you smart? You're a great guy." And that's what your mind is fucking doing when you're using the League to put it off. And this will fucking cause you to tilt, right? If you're neglecting your significant other or whatever to play League of Legends, that's bad. And your mind isn't going to like it because your mind knows you're being a fucking douchebag, whether you do or not. And it knows that you have these other priorities, whether you actively do or not, right? And this is my point with the relationship between the practice time and or not toxicity but tilt, right? Because if you are neglecting those other four things that I was talking about, if you're neglecting school work, socialization, or work itself in order to play League of Legends, then you're stunting your growth as a person, right? You're neglecting yourself and your own advancement. And if you keep doing this, right, you will stunt your own personal growth and your growth as a player. This is the single most important part of this video. If you take anything away from this, by God, please take this. You must have balance in your life if you want to improve. Because if you are neglecting other parts of your life to play League of Legends, you are stunting your growth as a person and as a player. Alright. And this is not just something that I've made up, right? I didn't just like come up with this off the top of my head. I'm not trying to be your mom, I'm not some 40-year-old dude trying to sit here telling you that, video games are bad, man. No, because this is a legit problem. And I've had personal experience with this. Alright? Personally, like myself, and personally as in friends. Alright? So if we're going to talk about personal performance for just like, for chronic tilt, I know that when I have my ducks in a row, I play better. Just like objectively. Like when I've taken out the trash and all the dishes are done, when I've done all my homework, I've made satisfactory progress on projects and essays that I have due, I can play League of Legends and I'll play pretty well, right? But if I haven't, I play like garbage. Like if you actually did a statistic, I think that I know for myself, but if you probably did one on yourself as well, where you looked at your performances when you had your shit sorted out and when you didn't, you would probably find a very strong correlation between positive play and having things done. I'm just like, I have not done the statistical test, but if you do, like if you want to do this and make a stats project out of it, do it. And I guarantee you, you will find a correlation. All right? Maybe not in everyone, but in the vast majority of people. Um, and the I have this coach that I work with, right? And he's silver 2. Now, I am plat 2, right? I am 2 whole leagues above this guy. But I trust him to pick for me, and I trust him to tell me about rotations because I know he's correct. So, the logical question that comes after this is, why is he silver 2? Why is this guy who sits down and studies LCK like a fucking like he's fucking paid to do it, not in diamond or even like platinum, right? Like, why is he so low rated? And I'll tell you, it's because the guy has a personal anger issue. Like, he has a problem that he needs to have dealt with that he is not, right? And it makes him tilt like no other. All right, when he's in game, like, this affects him twofold because like once he gets angry, he loses his like mind leaves him. Like, you know how it is. You just get angry and nothing else matters but that anger, right? And at that point, you're not making rotational calls in your head. You're not thinking about things very clearly. Like, you are just angry, and you can't make those calls because you're blind to them because all you have is your anger. And that's what happens to him. And this affects him twofold because he gets so angry, he can't play that many games in a row. And playing a lot of games in a row is the best way to build mechanics, right? And this guy can't build mechanics because he can only play like 1 or 2 games before he's just tilted off the face of the earth. And so this just like he will never get out of silver on his own with his current attitude, with his current like mental health issues. All right? But now I'm going to talk about the toxic relationships, right? Like, what is the toxic relationship that I've seen? I know because I had one when I first started. I was actually introduced to League by my girlfriend, right? And I failed my first year of college, or I barely didn't actually. I had like .01 GPA above the mark of failure. So I didn't fail. I didn't get like flunked out of college, but I was really close, right? Like, I was lucky that I was doing stuff that I had prior experience in. Because if I wasn't, if I hadn't already written programs in C, I would have fucking failed the class. Like, there's no way I would have done it because I wasn't like doing my homework on time. I was doing a really shitty job of it. My documentation was awful, everything like that. And on top of that, I wasn't just neglecting school. I was neglecting her, the very person that showed me this game. You know, I was neglecting her because I would be busy playing League of Legends and I'd forget that we were supposed to have a date, or I'd forget that we were supposed to do this or that, and that just really hurt our relationship. And that fucking affected me, right? Like, I played a lot of League of Legends when I first started, right? It's like when you find something new and you need to play a lot of it. I played a lot of League. And I was bronze. I was fucking bronze 4. Right? And you shouldn't be bronze 4 if you're playing a lot of games, right? If you're actually paying attention to these games. And that's because I didn't have my shit sorted and I was ignoring the things that I needed to do. Right? Now maybe you're saying, well, like, this is just you having your like personal catharsis, dude. Like, why are you putting this in a video? It's not just me. Not obviously, but I've grown as a person and I've met other people too who play League of Legends. And in fact, my school has a club dedicated to League of Legends, or just esports in general, and it is the biggest in our region, right? Like, my school has 20,000 people enrolled in it, and our League of Legends club is the biggest in our whole region. Not just like singular state, but multiple states. And I've met a lot of players, and the players who are the ones that are improving have their shit sorted out. Like, vastly more often than not, the high elo players that actually can like help you, and the ones that are actually working and are improving, and they demonstrate their skill consistently, things like that. they all have their shit sorted out. Now the silver but then I meet these like gold or silver players who complain about always being low elo, and they have this like talk. They say they have this toxicity problem and they acknowledge it. And these are also the same people who are sitting there like, oh man, I played like 10 games League of Legends last night, but I didn't do my homework, lol. And they talk about this, and I'm like, well, yeah, no wonder you're not improving because you're neglecting the things that are actually important, and your mind rebels against that. Right? This affects your play because you know you should be doing it. You know that League of Legends is not more important than your actual job. It is not more important than your education. And because you are neglecting it to try and do that, to try and play League of Legends, or just because you're more often than not, it's just a distraction for yourself, you're not playing well. You can't play well. Right? And, more often than not, like, this tends to be the source of their problem. And you can't tell this to people, right? Because people need to figure this out for themselves. And that's why I'm making this video. Because you need to, like, if you're having a big tilt problem, you need to look at yourself. Alright? Because improvement is not, like, to improve at the game, or to improve at anything, you first need to start with yourself. Because you are not perfect, but you can get better. And you need to look at yourself, and you need to sit down and figure out where your priorities are. And then you can figure out how League of Legends factors into that. Right? So, I hope that this helps you improve as a player and as a person, because that should be the end goal of your life. Or at least I believe that. I don't know. Maybe there's a better goal than self-improvement, but that's what I want to make this video for. And I hope it helps you. Anyway, this game doesn't go on for much longer, but yeah. So just remember to always look at yourself whenever you're having a problem. Examine it, right? Sit down and actually think about it. Like, figure out the source of your issues, because you can sit down and you can have a dialogue with yourself. I mean, not necessarily like talk to yourself, but you can just sit down and think about your issues, right? It's okay to sit down and consider things and just take a break for a while and think about life. Because it's important. Everyone needs to do it. It helps you get better as a person. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a philosophy major, dude. Don't listen to me. I'm not even Challenger. Garbage. Yeah, there you go. Tilt and practice. May the RNG gods be forever in your favor.